She only had her assistant try on my ring, but when she came to Reconcile, I was already remarried. The morning of our 10th wedding anniversary felt like any other. The alarm rang at 6:30. The city was barely awake. Sunlight sneaking between the blinds, touching the framed wedding photo that still sat on my nightstand. Me and Elena, both smiling, both young, both full of dreams that hadn't yet been tested by time. I slipped on my wristwatch, grabbed my keys, and kissed her goodbye as she sat at the vanity, fixing her makeup. "I'll be back early tonight," I said. She didn't look up from the mirror, just murmured, "Don't forget the reservation." She said it like a reminder, not excitement. I told myself it was fine. Elena had always been that way. Calm, composed. A woman who didn't show her emotions easily. Still, something felt off. At the hospital, the days stretched into a blur of white coats, hushed voices, and beeping monitors. I was in the middle of a difficult surgery, a cardiac repair that went on longer than expected. When the patient's heart finally stabilized, I stepped away, exhausted but satisfied. Saving a life always used to make me feel lighter, but that lightness vanished when my colleague, Dr. Mills, called out to me, "Ryan, your wife's here. She's waiting in the lounge." My heart lifted a little. Maybe she'd come to surprise me for our anniversary. I wiped my hands, took off my gloves, and walked down the corridor. But what I saw inside that lounge made my pulse freeze. Elena was sitting on the couch, chatting softly with her assistant, Drew. He was young, maybe mid-20s, well-dressed, a bit nervous. I'd seen him a few times before, hovering around her during business events. I never thought much of it, until now, because there, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, was my wedding ring on his hand. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was unmistakable. The inscription inside, the slight dent from years of wear. My ring. I stood there, motionless, trying to process it. Then quietly I asked, "Why are you wearing my ring, Drew?" The color drained from his face. "Sir, I mean, Dr. Cole, it's not what it looks like. Mrs. Cole just, she lent it to me, just to try it on. I didn't mean, lent it to you?" I repeated, my voice calm, but colder than ice. Elena turned then, eyes sharp. "Ryan, it's nothing serious." Drew said he wanted to see what a man's wedding ring feels like. He's planning to propose to his girlfriend. "So you gave him mine?" Her lips tightened. "It's just a ring. Don't make a scene." Something inside me went still. 10 years together. Every anniversary, every argument, every silent dinner flashed through my mind like a reel of film I suddenly didn't want to finish watching. To her, it was just a ring. But to me, it was the one thing I'd never taken off since the day I said I do. I reached out, slowly, and took the ring from Drew's hand. For a moment, I weighed it in my palm, heavy, familiar, cold. Then I looked at Elena. "If it's just a ring to you," I said softly, "then maybe it shouldn't mean anything to either of us." Her eyes widened slightly, sensing the finality in my tone. I slipped the ring into my coat pocket and turned toward the door. As I walked away, Drew called after me, panic in his voice. "Dr. Cole, please. She didn't mean anything by it." I stopped only long enough to say, without looking back, "Then she won't mean anything when she signs the papers either." I left the hospital lounge, the sound of Elena's heels echoing faintly behind me. She didn't follow. She didn't call. Just silence. The city outside was bathed in gold, the kind of sunset people call romantic. For us, it marked the end. On our 10th anniversary, the woman I loved had turned my promise into a prop for someone else. And in that moment, I knew the surgery I needed performed next was on myself. Because some wounds don't bleed. They just go quiet. The night I left the hospital lounge, the world outside felt strangely quiet. The rain had started, soft at first, like it was afraid to fall too hard. I sat in my car, watching the drops crawl down the windshield, my hands still trembling slightly. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a clarity. That sharp, surgical kind of clarity that only comes when something breaks clean. In surgery, we are trained to make clean cuts. No hesitation, no emotion, just precision. And that night, I realized I had to treat my marriage the same way. I went home, walked into the quiet apartment Elena and I had shared for a decade, and stood in the living room, surrounded by memories. Our framed wedding photo still hung on the wall. Her in white, me in black, both smiling as if we knew nothing could touch us. I smiled bitterly. Even surgeons can be naive. I sat down at my desk, opened a blank document on my laptop, and began typing. Divorce agreement between Ryan Cole and Elena Cole. Grounds. Irreconcilable differences. Each keystroke was steady, deliberate. By the time I finished, my pulse was calm again. The decision was done. The wound was clean. That night was supposed to be our anniversary dinner. I had reserved her favorite restaurant, arranged for the same table where we celebrated our first year together. There was supposed to be a bottle of aged wine, a quiet toast, maybe a chance to remember who we were before time and pride wore us down. But instead, I was sitting alone, watching the candle burn beside two untouched glasses. The waiter approached gently. "Will the lady be joining you, sir?" I shook my head. No, not tonight, not ever again. When I got home, the apartment was dark. She hadn't returned. And for the first time, that didn't bother me. I went to work as usual. No one could tell anything was wrong. That's the thing about surgeons. We learn to operate even when we're bleeding inside. But as I prepped for my first procedure, my nurse handed me a note. "From Mrs. Cole," she said quietly. I unfolded it. It was short, Elena's handwriting neat and sharp. "Ryan, we both said things we didn't mean. I'll come by tonight so we can talk." Talk? After seeing my ring on another man's hand. There was nothing left to say. Still, I left the door unlocked. Maybe a part of me still needed closure. She arrived that evening with her assistant. "Drew, again." I opened the door, silent, waiting for her to speak first. Drew's face looked pale. He was clearly dragged there against his will. "Ryan," Elena started, trying to sound calm. "You misunderstood what you saw. I only let him try it on, just for a moment. You know how people overreact." I cut her off. "You mean husbands?" Her jaw tightened. "You're making this a big deal for nothing." I turned, walked to my desk, and picked up the divorce agreement. Without a word, I placed it in front of her. Drew's eyes widened. "Dr. Cole, please." She didn't mean. I raised my hand to stop him. "Don't speak for her." Elena stared at the document, her lips trembling slightly. Then she looked up at me, eyes full of something between anger and disbelief. "So this is it? 10 years, you're just done?" I met her gaze. "No, Elena, you were done the moment my ring meant less than your pride." For a moment, silence filled the room, thick as smoke. Then she took the pen, scrawled her name across the paper, and stood. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door and said, her voice trembling, "Fine, just don't regret it." The door clicked shut, and I stood there, staring at the papers. I thought I'd feel relief, freedom, closure, but all I felt was stillness. The kind that comes after storm, when the world is too quiet, too calm, and you start to wonder what's left standing. That night, I sat on the balcony, staring at the city lights below. 10 years gone in 10 minutes. But for once, I didn't feel the urge to chase after her. Maybe because deep down, I knew that the man who used to love her was already gone. The next morning, I walked into surgery like nothing had happened. My nurse glanced at me. "Curious. Rough night, doctor?" I slipped on my gloves, eyes steady. "Just another operation," I said, "because in my world, when something's diseased, you don't cling to it. You cut it clean, and you never look back." The days after the divorce passed quietly, too quietly. No shouting, no tears, no calls, just silence. And sometimes silence is the loudest sound in the world. The morning after Elena signed the papers, I returned to our apartment to collect a few things. The air felt hollow, like the walls themselves were still waiting for her voice. The scent of her perfume lingered faintly, familiar, bittersweet. Our framed photo still sat on the piano, her arms around me, both of us laughing in the sunlight of our honeymoon. But now it was just a picture, just pixels of a life that no longer existed. I picked up my ring from the desk. It still carried the faint warmth of her touch from that day. I stared at it for a long time, then placed it in a drawer, not to forget, but to stop remembering. Work is an escape. At the hospital, I buried myself in my work. Days blurred into nights. Surgeries became my refuge, the only place where everything still made sense. Under the bright lights of the operating room, I didn't have to think about love or loss or the faint echo of her voice when she said, "Don't regret it." In there, it was just heartbeat and silence. Cut and stitch. Life and death. Simple. Predictable. My colleagues said I looked different. Calmer. Colder. And maybe I was... Because once you've cut away the part of you that hurts, you stop bleeding. But you also stop feeling. Elena's regret begins. Meanwhile, Elena's life started to crack. At first, she carried herself like nothing happened, posting photos, attending events, pretending she was fine. But the whispers started. People began to talk. "Did you hear? She lost him because of her assistant. I thought they were the perfect couple. She must have done something terrible." Drew, the assistant, couldn't take the gossip. He resigned quietly, sending her a short message before leaving. "I'm sorry. I never meant to ruin things between you two." When she read it, Elena's hand shook. For the first time, she realized she wasn't angry at me. She was angry at herself. Angry that she had let pride answer where love should have spoken. One night, as I was finishing my shift, I saw her name flash across my phone screen. I stared at it for a few seconds, then let it ring out. I didn't need to hear apologies, because apologies don't fix what respect has already broken. The next day, she came to the hospital, not to see me directly, just standing outside, across the street, watching as I left. Our eyes met briefly. She looked smaller somehow, tired, but I didn't walk toward her. I simply nodded once, then turned away. Sometimes, distance is the only dignity left. At night, the silence grew heavier. It wasn't the kind that begged for noise. It was the kind that asked you to listen to yourself. I cooked alone, ate alone, slept alone, and in that stillness, I began to hear the faintest echo of something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. Because peace doesn't come when life is perfect. It comes when you stop chasing what broke you. Weeks later, Elena tried to call again, but by then I had changed my number. She went to my old apartment, only to find strangers living there. She stood in the hallway, staring at the door that used to open to our world, now closed forever. It hit her then, fully cruelly, the life she'd taken for granted was truly gone. That night, she wrote me a letter. She never sent it, but I'd find it months later, tucked into a file at the hospital she used to visit. It said only 3 lines. "Ryan, you were right. It was never just a ring. It was you I lost." And as I stood by the window that evening, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky, I realized that sometimes endings don't explode. They fade, softly, quietly, and in that silence, 2 people learn who they truly are, one finding regret, the other finding peace. 15 days. That's all it took for Elena's confidence to crumble and for my life to start feeling light again. Half a month since she walked out of my office, signing her name like it meant nothing. Half a month since I stopped waiting for her voice to fill the silence. Half a month since I'd worn the ring that once defined me. Ryan sighed, a quiet renewal. Life has a strange way of healing you when you stop forcing it. I didn't plan to move on. I wasn't looking for anyone. But she came quietly into my days, like sunlight after a storm. Dr. Clara Wynn, a pediatrician who had joined our hospital a few weeks earlier. Clara was everything Elena wasn't anymore. Warm, unguarded, and kind in the small ways that matter most. She never asked questions she didn't need to ask. She just noticed. She noticed the way I still touched the faint tan line on my ring finger when I was lost in thought. She noticed how I stayed at the hospital longer than necessary, not because of work, but because I didn't want to go home. And one night, when the power went out during operation, she stayed beside me in the darkened hall, flashlight in hand, steady as ever. When I thanked her, she just smiled softly. "Even surgeons need someone to hold the light," she said. And maybe that's when I realized I had found something different, something gentler. Elena sighed, the crumbling facade. Meanwhile, Elena's carefully constructed world was starting to collapse. The company she managed was losing clients. Gossip spread faster than wildfire. People whispered that she'd ruin her marriage over a meaningless flirtation. Everywhere she turned, there were eyes, judging, pitying, whispering. And worst of all, her nights were empty. She'd scroll through her phone, staring at our old photos, our vacations, our anniversaries, our laughter. But the one image that haunted her most was a look on my face that day in the hospital. Not angry, not broken, just done. That expression was colder than any argument we'd ever had, because it meant I'd finally stopped trying. The return. It was a rainy Thursday when she finally decided to come find me. She'd rehearsed her apology 1,000 times in her head, imagining how I might still look at her the way I once did. She arrived at the hospital, drenched from the rain, clutching a small velvet box. Inside it, the wedding ring she once called just a ring. It was polished now, gleaming as if I could erase what had happened. Her heart pounded as she walked through the familiar corridors. Every nurse she passed looked at her differently now, some with pity, others with quiet curiosity. When she reached my office, she hesitated, then knocked. The new beginning she never expected. "Come in," I said from inside. She stepped in, breath catching. I was there, standing beside the window, and I wasn't alone. Claire was beside me, a cup of coffee in her hand, smiling gently as we spoke. Elena froze, her voice barely a whisper. "Ryan, I turned, calm and composed. "Elena, it's been a while." Her eyes darted between us. "You already have someone else?" There was no bitterness in her tone, only disbelief. I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at Clara, who gave me a small nod and quietly excused herself. When the door closed, Elena's composure shattered. She placed a velvet box on my desk. "I came to return this," she said, voice trembling. "It belongs to you." I looked at the box, then at her. "No, Elena, it belonged to us. And that part of my life, it's over." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You really moved on that easily?" I sighed softly. "It wasn't easy. It was necessary." She shook her head, desperate now. "Ryan, you're making a mistake. She doesn't love you like I did." And for the first time, I smiled, sadly but genuinely. "You're right," I said quietly. "She loves me differently. She loves me enough to never make me question my worth." The end of what was. Elena stood there, silent, her hands trembling. She had so much to say, but no words strong enough to bridge the distance between us. After a long pause, she whispered, "I thought you'd still be waiting for me." I met her eyes one last time. "I waited, Elena, until you made it clear I shouldn't." And with that, she turned and walked out of my office, her heels clicking faintly against the cold hospital floor, each step echoing like the sound of something finally breaking. When she reached the parking lot, the rain was falling harder now. She opened the box one last time, before closing it forever. Inside, the ring gleamed in the gray light, lonely, beautiful, meaningless. Meanwhile, I stood by the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. Clara returned quietly and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, for the first time in years. I actually am." They say the worst kind of pain isn't losing someone. It's realizing too late that they were never yours to lose in the first place. For Elena, regret didn't arrive like a storm. It came slowly, one quiet morning at a time. The mornings without him. Elena's mornings used to begin with a voice. A good morning. A cup of coffee on the bedside table. The sound of me humming off-key in the kitchen. Now, they began with silence. The kind of silence that fills every corner of your home and makes even the ticking clock sound cruel. She'd sit by the window, staring at the gray skyline, replaying our last conversation in her mind. The way I said it was necessary. The way I looked at her, not with anger, but with peace. That peace haunted her, because peace meant finality. Peace meant I had truly let her go. Attempts at redemption. Regret makes people do desperate things. At first, she tried the small gestures, flowers in my office, a letter left with the receptionist, a text asking to meet just to talk. I never responded. Then she started showing up more often at the hospital, pretending she was there for business. But everyone could tell she wasn't. Even Clara. One afternoon, Clara walked into the waiting room to find Elena sitting there, waiting for me. She didn't scold her, didn't make a scene. She just said softly, "He's in surgery, Mrs. Cole. You should go home." Elena's voice cracked. "He used to come home to me after surgeries." Clara looked at her, eyes kind but firm. Maybe because back then, he didn't have to question if home was still his. That was the day Elena stopped trying to visit. Ryan sighed, the calm after the storm. For me, life had grown simpler. The days were steady, unhurried. Clara's presence wasn't loud. It was gentle, consistent. She didn't demand my attention. She earned it quietly. Some nights, after long shifts, we'd sit in the cafeteria, drinking bad hospital coffee, and talking about everything but the past. She never asked about Elena, but one evening I mentioned her anyway. "She came by again last week," I said. "Didn't stay long." Clara looked at me thoughtfully. "Does it still hurt?" I took a long breath before answering. "No," I said. "It just reminds me of who I used to be and how much I've changed." She smiled softly. "Then maybe that's her purpose now, to remind you how far you come." Elena's breaking point. The more I moved on, the more Elena unraveled. Her friends stopped calling. Even her family grew distant. Everyone seemed to sense what she finally knew, that she had pushed away the one person who had truly loved her. One night, she sat in her car outside the hospital, watching from a distance. Through the glass doors, she saw me walking beside Clara, the two of us laughing softly as we shared an umbrella in the rain. That sight shattered something in her. Not jealousy, just truth. She realized then that she was no longer part of my story. And for the first time, she cried, not out of anger or pride, but pure, aching loss. The letter she finally sent. A week later, I received a letter at the hospital, handwritten, unmarked, but I knew it was hers. It said, "Ryan, I used to think you were the lucky one to have me, but now I see it was me who was lucky. You gave me love I didn't know how to keep. And when I handed that ring away, I wasn't lending it. I was throwing it all away. I don't want you back. I just want you to know I finally understand what I lost. I hope she loves you better than I did. Elena." I folded the letter quietly and placed it in my drawer, not as a keepsake, but as closure, because sometimes the words that come too late are the ones that finally let you move on. The healing. As the weeks passed, I started smiling more. Not the polite smiles people give out of habit, but real ones. The kind that come from peace. The peace of knowing you survived the fire and walked out whole. Clara never asked what the letter said. She didn't need to. She saw it in my eyes. "Let's get lunch," she said one afternoon. "Somewhere with sunlight." I laughed. "Sunlight? I thought doctors were allergic to that." She grinned. "Maybe it's time we tried something new." And for the first time, I wanted to. That night, I passed by the hospital's lost and found box. A velvet ring box set inside, forgotten, unclaimed. It looked just like the one Elena had once brought back to me. I stared at it for a long moment, then turned away, because the truth is, I didn't need the past anymore. I was already building something new. And for Elena, regret had finally come full circle. The ring she once called just a ring had become the heaviest thing she'd ever held. There are moments in life that define you, moments when you're forced to stand still and watch the world move on, without you. For Elena, that moment was my wedding day. The invitation she wasn't supposed to see. The invitation wasn't meant for her. It came by accident, slipped into a stack of mail addressed to her old company. White envelope, gold edges, my name embossed beside another woman's, Dr. Ryan Cole and Dr. Clara Moore. She told herself she wouldn't go. She repeated it a dozen times as she stared at the invitation that night. But when the day came, She found herself standing outside the church, her hands trembling, her heart caught between guilt and longing. She wasn't there to cause a scene. She just needed to see if I looked happy, to see if I still wore the same smile I used to wear for her. The ceremony. The church was bathed in soft morning light, the kind that filters through stained glass and paints everything in gentle color. Music drifted through the air. Piano, violins, the rustle of silk dresses. Clara walked down the aisle, graceful and calm, her eyes fixed on me. There was no grand performance, no trembling hands or exaggerated vows. Just two people who had weathered their storms and finally found peace in each other. From the back row, Elena watched in silence. Every vow we exchanged cut through her, like a whisper she wasn't meant to hear. I promise to choose you every day, even when it's hard. I promise to never let the world make us strangers again. She remembered the vows we once shared, vows she'd forgotten how to keep. And for the first time, she understood what those words truly meant. The moment of truth. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," the applause filled the church like a wave. Everyone rose to their feet. Everyone except her. Elena sat motionless, her eyes glistening, her chest tight. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't, because even through the ache, there was something beautiful in seeing me happy again. When Clara turned to face the crowd, hand in mine, Elena finally saw it, the peace in my eyes that she could never give. And it broke her completely. The bouquet. After the ceremony, laughter spilled across the courtyard. Someone shouted, "Time for the bouquet toss." Clara laughed softly, turning her back to the small crowd of women behind her. Elena stood far away, near the gate, ready to slip out quietly. But as the bouquet flew, twisting through the air, it fell short, landing right at her feet. The laughter died for a brief moment as people turned to look. Elena froze. The white roses lay before her like a memory reborn. Slowly, she bent down, picked them up, and stepped forward. Everyone expected her to leave, but she didn't. Instead, she walked toward Clara, holding the bouquet gently. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Congratulations," she said. "Take care of him. He deserves a happiness I couldn't give." Clara smiled softly. "He finally found it. Thank you." For a long second, the two women looked at each other, not as rivals, but as two souls who both knew the cost of losing something real. Then Elena placed the bouquet into Clara's hands and walked away. I didn't see her approach, but as the guests dispersed, Clara told me what happened. I looked toward the gate, catching just a glimpse of Elena's figure disappearing down the path, her hair catching the afternoon light, her shoulders trembling slightly. I didn't chase after her, because some goodbyes are better unspoken. I simply whispered, more to myself than to anyone, "Goodbye, Elena." The last glance. From the corner of the street, Elena turned one last time. She saw me laughing, holding Clara's hand as our friends surrounded us. It wasn't bitterness she felt anymore. It was closure, painful but pure. And as she walked away, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Not for what she lost, but for the love she never learned how to keep. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Clara and I stood together, looking at the horizon. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I glanced down at my hand, the same hand that once held a different ring, a different life. Now it bore a new one. And for the first time, I understood the difference between loving someone out of habit and loving someone because they're home. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. It doesn't erase them. It just teaches you how to live with them. 3 years had passed since that wedding day. 3 years since the bouquet fell at her feet. 3 years since I last saw Elena. Years later, life had changed. Clara and I had a small home now, filled not with luxury but laughter. We shared coffee before sunrise, took walks on Sundays, and learned to argue gently, not cruelly. It was a kind of quiet love I once thought didn't exist. But the past never fully disappears. Sometimes it just waits for the right moment to say goodbye. The hospital corridor. It was a gray afternoon when she returned to my world. I was on call, walking through the corridors of the hospital, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Ryan." I turned, And there she was, Elena. Her hair was shorter now, streaked faintly with silver. Her eyes no longer burned with pride or defiance, but with something softer, acceptance. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Just silence, the kind that carries the weight of everything left unsaid. Finally, she smiled faintly. You still work too much. I couldn't help but smile back. Some things never change. The conversation. We sat in the hospital courtyard, beneath the same oak tree where I used to take my breaks. She told me she started her own small design studio, that she was doing fine, that she wasn't here to rekindle anything, just to say what she never could before. I used to think you'd never forgive me, she said quietly. I didn't come here for forgiveness, though. I came to tell you, thank you. I looked at her, puzzled. For what? She smiled, a tired, genuine smile. For loving me, even when I didn't know how to love myself. The truth that heals. For the first time, I saw her as she was, not the woman who betrayed me, not the one who broke my heart, but simply a person who had learned the hard way what love truly meant. I nodded slowly. Elena, I forgave you a long time ago. Her eyes filled not with pain, but relief. You really did move on. I smiled softly. I had to. We both did. There was no anger, no bitterness, just peace. The kind that comes when two stories finally reach their natural end. The goodbye. As she stood to leave, the wind picked up, rustling the trees. She turned back once, the same way she had at the wedding years ago. This time, she smiled fully. No tears. No regret. Be happy, Ryan, she said. You were always meant to be. I watched her walk away, not as the woman I once loved, but as someone I finally wish well. That was our real goodbye, not the one in courtrooms or at altars, but here, under the soft light of closure. That evening I went home. Clara was there, cooking dinner, humming a tune off key, just like I used to. When she saw me, she smiled. Rough day? I shook my head. No, just a meaningful one. She kissed my cheek and whispered, Then it's a good day. I looked down at my hand, the wedding ring glinting under the kitchen light, the same symbol that once tore my life apart, now quietly holding together. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go with grace. Elena taught me that endings don't have to be bitter, and Clara showed me that second chances can bloom from ashes. As I turned off the lights that night, I realized I didn't hate the past anymore, because without it, I'd never have found my forever.